Hello, welcome to the latest from Iguacu, your trusted source for effective overseas giving at weareiguacu.org. Iguacu removes the frustration of overseas giving. Visit us at weareiguacu.org and you'll see why. Shortly we'll be joined by our lead researchers. Please post a question. These updates are for you to share the world of Iguacu, the crises we cover, the charities we cover, any questions you might have about effective giving overseas. Don't hesitate to post a question. Thank you for joining us. You know, we like to share some good news at Iguacu. We love good news at Iguacu. So let me start off this week with some. You may have heard about the heir to Saudi Arabia's throne and the comments he made, which are quite significant in the context of the Middle East. The heir to Saudi Arabia's throne, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has declared that Israel has the right to its own land alongside Palestinians, given his status and that he's the likely heir. This is a very significant development in the Middle East, in a long-running cancerous crisis that has had widespread ramifications throughout the world in terms of its tentacles spreading violent conflict. So any step forward towards a resolution of that long conflict is good news. So that's some good news from this week. Also, we heard from Spain that the Basque terrorist group ETA, which laid down its arms in 2011 after a campaign spanning more than 40 years, is expected to announce its complete dissolution within the next few weeks. That campaign was one of the most enduring terrorist campaigns in world history, killing more than 820 people, nearly half of them civilians. So that's another piece of good news, and our lead researcher who covers natural disasters around the world, Adib Chowdhury, is about to join us, and I believe he has some more good news. So let me just see if I can join Adib here into the conversation. Natural disasters and disaster response for Iguacu. Don't hesitate to post a question. I'm sure Adib would be happy to answer. Hi, Adib.
Yes, hi Catherine, how are you?
Very good, how are you?
Excellent, it's all good with me.
Very good, and I was just saying you've got some good news for us this week.
Yes, I do. Well, I guess it is good news in the sense that there's been no major natural disasters from some of the most vulnerable countries in the world, at least in the past few weeks, which is good news in itself. But so instead, what I thought I would do is share an interesting project that I read about quite recently. And the project is called Open Cities Project. And what they do is they actually get local people involved, local people that is in vulnerable natural disaster prone countries, involved in the resilience programs and the disaster response programs. And how they do that is they train them up to learn how to make maps, because of course in these remote areas it's the local people who have the in-depth knowledge of every nook and cranny in these very remote areas. An example would be most recently in Papua New Guinea, where a lot of aid workers who went over had no idea, because some of the maps were outdated, how to access some of the areas. And in fact, even local people from nearby villages in another hill nearby didn't know where their nearest village was or the quickest way to access in case another way got blocked. And so, of course, making this more efficient, but cut down disaster response times, which means you save more lives. And another example would be where this project has been very successful is in Nepal. So back in 2012, the government of Nepal actually allowed Open Cities access to some of the data in order to speed things up. So Open Cities got access to where the hospitals were and schools were in these remote places. And in doing that, that meant that in 2 years later, after the project had been completed, when 2 huge earthquakes struck Nepal in 2015, these maps were actually used, and it's estimated that they were a significant factor in improving disaster response times and saving numerous lives. And this isn't really quantifiable, but numerous aid agencies had said that it was a key factor in doing so. And in fact, it's been so successful that the program has been rolled out to countries such as Philippines, Indonesia, and even in Bangladesh in rural areas, just to improve disaster response programs over there. So I think this is a great example of how international initiatives such as this can come in and work with local actors to come up with something really strong, really cohesive, and more importantly, extremely effective. So that's all I have for this week.
In the heat of a disaster, good information is so hard to find. And I was in Nepal, and I remembered that they use these handheld devices, and all the maps, the detailed maps, were on these devices. Is that how they use is that how they pick up the information? They have the software on the devices, and they train them how to use them? Do you know the details of the actual...
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I'm not sure of the intricacies of the training process. I'm not sure how long it takes, but yeah.
I just remember when I was there, they all had these devices, and they had the street by street, and they had each building marked and how many people. It was wonderful. So I guess that was what you're talking about, and it's great to hear that it's being rolled out around the world. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. That's great news.
Yeah, thank you very much,
Adib. Until next week. Bye for now.
Until next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too. So next to join us from the research desk, I believe, is Nathaniel Shiraki. Nathaniel is our lead researcher for Syria and Iraq, which unfortunately there is no good news from that part of the world right now, and I'm sure he will bring you up to date with the most important things to know. Hello, Nat. Thank you for joining.
Hello. How are you?
Hi. Very well. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Very good. So I was just saying, you won't have any good news for us from Syria and Iraq, but you will have the most important things to know. So why don't you crack on and let us know what there is to know? Yeah,
definitely. So the main hotspot still remains Eastern Ghouta. I'm going to talk about Idlib as well. But in Eastern Ghouta, you still have thousands of people fleeing this besieged area. You know, it's a besieged area near Damascus. In less than 1 month, 80,000 people have fled. The majority of them have found refuge near Damascus in overcrowded shelters with very poor sanitation. You have also thousands of people that have been forcibly evacuated or willingly left as a result of local agreements that organized the takeover, the progressive takeover of the enclave by government forces. So the enclave formerly held by opposition fighters. There were rumors and reports today that the last rebel group actually surrendered and finally agreed to an evacuation, but this is still unconfirmed. What I can say is that it's still likely to happen or something of that sort. At least a final victory of the government is the likely option, which poses the question, what happens to humanitarian aid and the thousands of people that remain in acute need after the government takes over? So I've talked here in great length about how difficult it is to reach people in areas controlled by opposition, and it's not necessarily more easy when it's the government. In fact, many experts on the ground that I spoke to can say that it tends to be even harder. So basically what happens when the government takes over a zone controlled by the opposition, they ban the charities that were operating there. Sorry. And they sorry. Always handy to have a cup of water. Sorry. And they replace them. So they replace the charities that were operating there under opposition control. They replace them with charities they vetted themselves. But those charities tend not to be effective before months have passed. They are not operational. They don't know the ground. And this is only in the case they ever get approval to actually deliver aid, because they need approval to do that from the government. So our recommended charity SAMS, that's operating in Eastern Ghouta, is actively trying to circumvent this issue. We'll keep you updated on their doings.
And do you know much about what's happening in Idlib, it being the last major place of opposition forces in Syria, and no doubt the Assad regime and their allies have planned?
Definitely, yeah, and SAMS is already there. They are trying to welcome the best they can the thousands of people that are fleeing, sorry, from eastern Ghouta to Idlib. So Idlib is, as you said, this region in the northwest of Syria. That's the last remaining major stronghold of the opposition in Syria. It's a whole region, and it's been welcoming most of the displaced people from other opposition-controlled areas in Syria for years, and since mid-December only, they've received 400,000 people. So you can imagine the local capacity, despite some very welcoming populations, the local capacity to cope with such an influx is beyond overstretched. So people arriving from Eastern Ghouta, the vast majority of them don't find a site, don't find a shelter. And there were, on top of that, reports of increasing violence, including airstrikes, those same Russian and Syrian airstrikes that the people from Eastern Ghouta were trying to escape from. So there is indeed a long-standing and more acute fear that given this high concentration of non-combatant families from all over Syria in this part of Syria, Idlib, that the Assad regime and their allies would consider it as their next target in their effort to rout the opposition, and that those people, those civilians, those millions of civilians that are living there would suffer the fate of the people of Eastern Ghouta or Aleppo.
A moment's silence. Nat, thank you so much for that update, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. See you next week,
Thank
Catherine.
you.
Bye.
Very good. Well, I will just bring into the conversation our next lead researcher, Blondine Zidinier. And Blondine is our lead researcher for South Sudan and Central African Republic. And she is going to give you an update, I know at the very least, on South Sudan, and she will join us shortly. Please don't hesitate to post a question on any of our crises, on any of our recommended charities. Hello, Blondine. How are you?
Hi, Catherine.
How are you?
Good, and you?
Very well, thank you, thank you. And I said that you were perhaps having an update on South Sudan for us today.
Absolutely, because last week the regional body mediating peace in South Sudan called IGAD met to discuss peace talks in the country. IGAD announced the next round of talks will be held later this month and asked the African Union to take punitive measures against those undermining peace efforts in the country. In addition, IGAD announced that rebel leader Riek Machar will be released from house arrest in South Africa. The strategy to sideline Riek Machar has actually not worked. The conflict has continued and more armed groups emerged. However, Riek Machar will not be allowed to return to South Sudan. The government and the opposition are pursuing very different strategies regarding what peace to implement in South Sudan and appear reluctant to compromise. However, recent intensified international pressure could force parties to negotiate.
Well, we've certainly waiting to see what happens with those developments very closely. Thank you. And was you wanted to share with us about the Central Republic this week?
Well, last week, President Touadéra celebrated his 2 years in office. His election was widely welcomed throughout the Central African Republic, with much hope. But 2 years after, his presidency has brought mixed results. 2017 was actually the most violent year since 2014 at the height of the crisis, and humanitarian needs have exploded. Actually, the country remains largely controlled by armed groups. After his election, President Touadéra laid out a 5-year plan to build or rebuild the country, which has virtually no infrastructure and where the state is effectively a phantom state. The international community pledged $1.6 billion to finance the plan in 2016. And 2 years after, the vast majority of funds are yet to be received by the Central African Republic.
Okay, well, that's really important to flag that, and we should perhaps be focusing even more attention publicly about this very big funding gap at such an important time for this country. Well, thank you for that update, Blondine. That's great. Until next week.
Thanks, Catherine. See you.
Bye. Very good. Thank you, Blondine. So next we have an update that's being prepared by our lead researcher for Haiti and Myanmar, Kirsty Aventurine. And let me just share this with you. So last week you may have heard Myanmar elected key figure U Win Mint as the new president, following the unexpected resignation of Myanmar's former president after less than 2 years in power. The incoming president is known for his loyalty to leader Aung San Suu Kyi and is unlikely to bring much change in the current policies affecting the Muslim Rohingya minority. In fact, during his inauguration, the new president spoke of his commitment to uphold human rights and referred to a peace-building process involving ethnic groups, but that process does not even include the Rohingya, as the government does not recognise the Rohingya as an ethnic minority of Myanmar. In Bangladesh, where more than 700,000 Rohingya refugees have arrived from Myanmar since last August, the imminent onset of the monsoon season remains a serious concern. In response, the Bangladeshi government began last week the relocation of 100,000 Rohingya to safer locations and is spending nearly $280 million to build temporary shelters on an island off the Bay of Bengal. However, the initiative continues to receive little enthusiasm from international organisations who fear Rohingya will be left stranded and unsafe on the island. Well, thank you to Kirsty Aventurine for that update. And I'm just checking to see if you have posted any questions for the research team, and if not, feel free to post them during the week on our Facebook feed at any time, and we can answer them for you via email on the Facebook page or via our next update. Thank you very much for joining us this week. Wishing you a great week. Bye for now.